She does not have to bring this up at all. She could just, like, you know, provide the apology if this is a genuine apology, and she doesn't have to be like, oh, well, look at all of these things that I did for you. This person might genuinely be sorry, but because of this, we might not even know. Yes, Red and I were initially upset when Bao hired my editor, and I took it personally when I shouldn't have. You know what? Kudos to this person for admitting that. The most you could say is that Red was being a little bit shady and a little bit backhanded, and was definitely talking or attempting to allude or throw shade, but slanderous? No. It's just unfortunate. This could have been solved privately, and they could have apologized to each other, and none of this would have ever had to be made public and potentially damage anybody's reputations. All right. So, yesterday, I covered this document by Nanoless. Now, this individual is an artist, a prolific artist, would be more appropriate to say, who works with a lot of VTubers and makes art for several VTubers, as we found out through yesterday's document. She posted, I believe it's a she, on April 26th, 2025, allegations against Sinder. Allegations would be appropriate considering that in the document she describes her experience of manipulation, her experiences with being brought into drama, her experiences with basically being asked to be an exclusive partner with Redacted and another VTuber known as Sinder. So basically, what had occurred is that Redacted was smeared as being a manipulative, business-focused individual, which I concluded is simply just not the case. And we have this apology by Sinder that I'm going to be going through today. And by the way, Sinder is an incredibly popular YouTuber, which I did not know yesterday, but I know now. Very, very, very prolific in her own right as well. And she's basically coming to apologize about these manipulation allegations. There's nothing I can say to make this better, but I will try my best to properly convey my feelings, frustrations, and mistakes. I like to explain my point of view and apologize to each party affected. Redacted has been my co-content creator since I began making content, managing all aspects of what I do, and being a major part of why I'm here. We have also been in a relationship since the start of my endeavors. It's no secret that many VTubers choose to keep their public and personal lives separate, and I'm no different. As of yesterday, he is no longer working with me, and I have not extensively discussed any of this with him. Where our personal situation goes from here will be figured out between us privately. I never intended to mention us publicly, but given that the claims are out there, I want everyone to know I'm taking this seriously. After years of working on everything together, his hyper business-oriented outlook warped my view of what it is I should be doing, and what should be important to me as I navigate this career path. Which, by the way, to be clear, he actually wasn't that hyper business-oriented, at least not per the screenshots that we saw in the former document. He was actually being quite reasonable and executing like a decent plan to have like some proprietary work to build a sort of brand identity, which is important in situations like this. It's incredibly important for somebody to have a specific identity, which in the case of VTubers can sometimes have to do with, you know, proprietary art styles, models, and whatnot. So I would actually say that Redacted wasn't being too insane when it came to handling any of these business relationships with Nanoless. It just so happens that the way that that document was formatted and the way that all of the words were loaded in that document made the situation appear to be a lot more coercive, manipulative, and potentially slanderous, when that's simply just not the case. That simply is just not the case. But anyways, so she's like apologizing and basically cutting off her own boyfriend as a manager for no reason. And also, another thing that I want to mention is that in another tweet, she was actually exposed, not voluntarily. She was exposed involuntarily for having her boyfriend manage her business, right? Which is actually incredibly bad in the VTube space, because having a boyfriend when it comes to these individuals could potentially ruin like this immersion that their audience has with these individuals, right? So, like, this could be a huge hit to her reputation, even though they technically did nothing wrong. But I'm gonna skip this because honestly, there is no reason why she should have to apologize for this. There is no reason why she should have to expose her relationship with her boyfriend, because that is going to give a huge hit to her public reputation, and it's going to make it seem as if she's guilty of something when in reality she isn't. If these people want to build a long-lasting career, then the steps that this redacted individual took or attempted to take to make a more secure identity is actually incredibly important to building a long-term, brand, a long-term brand. In regards to Nanoless, for the majority of the time working with her, Red was the one almost solely doing the communication about new plans and negotiations through his private DMs, which is fine, in my opinion. Sometimes you will outsource or delegate responsibilities to an individual. In this case, this guy was her manager, and he chose himself as being the main communicator. That's just how people operate sometimes when it comes to situations like this. Nano had a project server we were all part of where the actual art and models were worked on, but the conversations were focused around the work itself. I was not fully aware of the extent of the Red's manipulation, which again, there was hardly any. I have to make clear, there was hardly any. There was no manipulation here. And if it is a very naive interpretation of what manipulation even means over Nano's commission's decisions. And I should have been more diligent in my oversight. Every time I had been told that Nano had agreed to work on a new commission with me, it had been willingly and with excitement. From my point of view, it was that she genuinely wanted to be working on these things. I wanted to work with Nano as much as I possibly could, making her art the face of my brand. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes, when you want to build an identity for your brand, especially when your brand revolves around you as a person, when it revolves around you as an idol, because let's be fair, VTubers have cemented themselves in the modern internet as being sort of like e-idols, right? Internet idols. It is entirely fair for these people to want some sort of proprietary artwork so that they can continue to build an identity that is recognized for the specific art, for these specific models, right? And granted, I am not much of a VTube connoisseur, but I mean, this is easily interpretable. This is something that anybody could understand intuitively. Sorry, let me rephrase that. This is something that anyone who does YouTube or anyone who has aspirations to become a YouTuber or creator can understand intuitively. I wanted to work with Nano as much as I possibly could, making her art the face of my brand. We had come to the conclusion that it'd be in my best interest to talk with Nano about making more time for my projects by negotiating with her to cut out other work. This was wrong for us to push onto her, and it was wrong to the other creators who wanted the chance of working with her. Okay, if you want to feel that it is wrong, like you wronged this individual, that's fine. But this is actually not too wrong to do, because when it comes to situations like this where you want to create a partnership with an individual to, again, push your brand, to have a dedicated artist to, focus on your brand identity, what was going on here was not specifically manipulative or even forcing her to do anything. What Redacted did is offered this individual a contract for, exclusive work, which is completely fine. And he also gave her the opportunity to not, take the contract. There was no forcing here. Well, Cinder is apologizing for literally no reason. And people are going to perceive the situation as a lot more malicious than what it actually is. Because it isn't malicious at all. There was only one specific creator we were responsible for naming and pressuring Nano into reconsidering projects with, not an entire list. Of her own volition, Nano canceled a large portion of her model commissions last September. However, the claim that I was just using her is wrong. I've always treated Nano with respect, and as my friend, I did give her a lot of work, and we did everything we could to accommodate her schedule if she needed more time or a break, which, if this is true, I find this to be incredibly fair, because when it comes to people that do a trade as a living, such as doing art, it's incredibly important to constantly give somebody a stream of work so that they can continue to make money off of their trade, and so that they can continue to have something to work on, so they can continue expanding their portfolio if eventually they are to move on from you, right? This is fine. I don't see a problem with this. And even helped her with her own project payments multiple times. I've invited her on my stream, I've sent her my merch and things she's made for me, and I was always open to thinking to her about things outside of her projects in the instances we would message each other regarding this part right here, where she's like bringing this up to her face, and even helped her with her own project payments multiple times. I've invited her on my stream. I've even sent her merch, and all of this, it's completely unnecessary. She doesn't have to bring this up to her face. She does not have to bring this up at all. She could just provide the apology if this is a genuine apology, and she doesn't have to be like, oh, well, look at all of these things that I did for you. Because if anything, this can be used against Cinder to try to paint her out as a transactional individual, which might not even be the case here. This person might genuinely be sorry, but because of this, we might not even know. Regarding the exclusivity deal made between them, I had no part in the direct negotiations of their eventual agreement, and I had no knowledge of Bao and Colton being included in this list. If I had known my friends were included, I would have said something to put a stop to it. I was only aware of it being about one person who I was unfairly pursuing. When Nano had messaged me about this agreement almost a month later, I was under the assumption this was only about Silvervale, which is unfortunately a situation that I don't know anything about because I do not care about all of this, petty VTuber drama. It's completely pointless to me. I was upset, and my initial messages to her were very guilt-trippy. I don't think so. At least not the ones that we were shown previously. I don't think that they were extremely guilt-trippy. But, I mean, if you want to own up to it, sure, but this person might be apologizing too rashly. They might be over-egging it for what actually occurred. But I wasn't going to force Nano to do anything she wasn't okay with and tried reassuring her that I was okay with her decision. Nano had also never come to me as seriously and professionally as her document was looking to address the issues she had with either of us, or to terminate our partnership. I had no idea there was even a conversation about Shy Lily recently between Red and Nano until reading her document. It's true, I had confided in Red that lately I hadn't been hearing from Lily like I had in the past and was worried something was wrong, but that's as far as it went. And he took it upon himself to try digging for more information, which, again, while it might be a little bit backhanded, while it might be a little bit shady, to do, it's not entirely a bad thing to do. Sometimes, if there are conflicts of interest, it might be in your best interest as a business manager to get more information on something that could potentially jeopardize your business or jeopardize your identity. And I was never even aware Nano was ever planning to work in a model for another one of my friends. I do not condone anything about what Red said about Bao in these DMs either, and him using we and our in this context is abhorrently incorrect, and I believe was done to gain greater credibility behind what he was saying. Okay, well, if this guy was actually doing that, which I'm willing to believe this individual, charitably, I'm willing to believe Cinder charitably, then that is pretty deceptive of him to do. But even if he was doing that, what he was actually doing in these DMs was not at all as coercive or as manipulative or as insane as the document leads everybody to believe. Yes, Red and I were initially upset when Bao hired my editor, and I took it personally when I shouldn't have. You know what? Kudos to this person for admitting that. Business should not be a personal thing, but unfortunately some people do make it a personal issue. I felt as if maybe my content wasn't good enough, or like I wasn't paying enough for his work, but I accepted it and was happy for him for getting that bag and supporting one of my friends at the same time. And yes, I was also upset when Sack, the Boss Rush MV editor, had told us that he won't be working on any future projects with us and would instead be working exclusively for Bao. Maybe they had their own deal, by the way. Maybe I should point it out. Maybe they have their own deal. Maybe this editor and Bao had their own deal. I don't know who Bao is, but it's entirely possible that they came to their own exclusivity deal. But Red got it in his head that it was Bao's fault that it happened and seemingly held a grudge against her for it. He was very passionate about Boss Rush and the potential future projects around it, but he told me without an MV editor, as talented as Sag, the future projects wouldn't reach the same heights. So he created this headcanon that's laid out in those DMs. Which if he did, and if he is just speculating, like I mentioned in the previous VOD, as I mentioned in the previous stream, if he's just speculating and talking about speculatory drama, I wouldn't call that slanderous at all, especially because it was never brought out to the public, but I would consider it to be a little bit reckless and speculatory, which nobody should ever be doing about any interpersonal connections ever. I wasn't convinced this was the case, but it's my fault for never speaking with Bao about these things directly to clear things up, and letting it spiral to the point it got to. Every comment here about her own music, guilt-tripping, and claims about her shared feelings towards her are disgusting. I honestly don't know why he thought this way about my close friend beyond the resentment over those two things, or why it was worth sabotaging her over. Which, again, without additional information, I don't know if what you could call what was shown in those documents necessarily sabotaging. The It's Just Business screenshot of my DMs with Nano's document was from November of 2023, and I'll go into my thought process of everything I said here. What Red was trying to explain to Nano is that if everyone has a model by her, then my innate value of her models overall are diminished by her being in an oversaturation of that type of model out there, which is true. It diminishes this brand identity that relies on a specific form of artwork. This is absolutely true. Like she doesn't even have to apologize for that. That should just be intuitive knowledge by people, at least in my opinion. Obviously, a lot of people in the VTuber scene are going to be incredibly idiotic, and they're not going to understand this issue, but she has a point here, right? They should feel conflicted when a bunch of other people could potentially just be your market replacement. Imagine you are known for a very specific thing, and that's how you made your entire business. Maybe you're known for having like the greatest voice on YouTube and voicing creepy stories better than anybody else can. But now another person has found a way to emulate your voice using some like, voice model. Or maybe they just replicated your voice entirely on their own, right? All of a sudden, you won't be that appealing to a select market because there's going to be replacements for you. This is something that is incredibly, this is just fair to be aware of. This is just a fair thing to be concerned over. If everyone in the world had a VTuber model done by her, then the value of her model wouldn't be the same as if there were only a handful of them, which is true, which he viewed as a negative for me, which is a fair thing for him to do. It's a fair thing for him to view, it is fair for him to view it that way. I understand where he was coming from with this, but in the VTuber space, this isn't something we should have pursued. I can agree with that. You know what? This sort of like self-flagellation here, I can agree with. Because VTuber people are visceral. And when they hear about stuff like this, when they see stuff like this, people get really conflicted because there's so much parasocial ties and so many interpersonal ties when it comes to like VTubing and the VTubing community. Nano has an amazing skill where she's able to draw each of her VTuber children uniquely, so I was never upset seeing new model siblings. In many cases, I was there cheering them on at their debuts and looking to collab with them as sisters when I could. You know what? This is a good way to actually pursue like a sort of association, like a sort of industry, like a sort of brand, right? Like building, like world building, so to speak. Me saying it's just business was referring to my acceptance of Nano's business decisions, whether she chose to work with me or not. This was not in reference to anyone's model being cancelled, further explaining to her that it's okay if she chooses not to work with me. I can understand where the next part can sound manipulative, but my intention was to reminisce about the journey we had together up to this point. Which is fair. It's fair for her to say that. I don't think that anything in that document was manipulative. It was probably just interpreted that way because Nanoless seems to be a very naive individual with probably very little real-world experience, as patronizing as that is to say, okay? Sometimes assumptions like that are just fair to make. So maybe she just has a very naive worldview and interpreted what Cinder was doing as manipulative, what Red was doing as manipulative, when that very well could not have been the case. It didn't read as manipulative to me. And I've seen real cases of manipulation. Since at this time, I wasn't sure if this was where Nano and I would stop working together as frequently as we had been, and I'd have to look for a new model artist. I then encouraged her to work on projects she's excited about while I talked to Red to find a project that would work with her schedule. Fair? Fair? When talking about Silvervale, I need to start at the beginning. Before I was Cinder, I was a pink cherry blossom girl named Tashi that did ASMR content. When the VTuber boom happened in I don't even think we need to read this. I don't think we even need to read this. I'll read it anyways. Just so that we can get the full scoop. When talking about Silvervale, I need to start at the beginning. Before I was Cinder, I was a pink cherry blossom girl named Tashi that did ASMR content. When the VTuber boom happened in 2020, I knew I wanted to join in. Red and I contacted an artist in October. They were set to start my VTuber design by December. The plan was to take my cherry blossom persona Tashi and make her a pink and white wolf girl VTuber. In November of that same year, Silvervale revealed her Sakura wolf design. I had heard Silvervale earlier that year, but I didn't watch her streams at all. We knew we had to pivot before we were stuck with a design that would just be a copy of one of the most popular VTubers at the time, which is a smart move, right? Because then they would be accused of infringing on another person's concept, of infringing on another person's concept. Well, not infringing, but biting another person's concept. They would be accused of biting on another person's concept, which are allegations that you definitely don't want, especially as somebody who's trying to make their own identity in this space. Like I've explained many times on my stream, I knew I wanted to be a wolf girl, so I mixed my love of Okami and metal music into the design and came out with the Hellhound. I don't care, because I don't care about these VTubers and I don't care about what they look like or what their characters are. My name was originally going to be Emperor, but Red came up with the name Cinder since it was a mix of Sin plus Cinder. Don't care. Both hell and fire. Okay, lame. It was only a coincidence that it ended up being similar to Silver. I was genuinely interested in pursuing a friendship with her and drew fan art. This is getting way too parasocial in the weeds. And drew fan art of myself and of us together. On the other hand, Red was in my ear the whole time, saying how great working together would be. Since again, he's in the business-oriented side of my brand, which is a good thing. You want somebody to be business-oriented when managing your brand, when managing your business. That is a good thing. It is not entirely a bad thing, so long as they're not being unethical. Since I started streaming, I have been ruthlessly compared to Silvervale, being called the discount version of her, which is very unfortunate, incredibly unfortunate. But this is exactly why it's important, again, to have a brand identity. It is important to have a brand identity, which further, I feel, solidifies these people's sentiment to have an exclusive artist so that they separate themselves from the rest. I was accused of copying her design, copying her personality, even copying her laugh of all things. And there was a large number of people who were diehard believers in the fact that I stole all of these attributes, maliciously for my own gain, citing the art I posted of us together calling her an inspiration, when in reality, this was referring to the decision to become a hellhound. The only time Silvervale was mentioned in the original designing of my character was when we explained where we were pivoting to something else, and there were no references of her character involved. I grew more and more resentful of Silver over time, between the constant belittling of myself, a controversy around my first waifu cup, and other incidents, even though she herself never interacted with me directly. And it was also the fact that made me insecure. It was also that fact that made me insecure. This is exactly what I'm talking about too, when it comes to having a very specific identity. If you have a very specific identity, right, that is incredibly difficult to replicate, you cannot be called a copy of somebody else. Which is why it's even more important for an individual like this to have an exclusive artist if they can find one. And if that person was willing, it would have been actually very beneficial for not only the artist, but for these individuals. Because the artist would have had recurring work, these individuals would have probably grown a very unique brand, probably would have gotten significantly more money because of the uniqueness of their brand, and this person would have gotten significantly more and more money, right? But if money isn't everything, and that's not what these people care about, fine. So at that point, I was working with Nano consistently. We brought up not making any more models for her. If a VTuber model is how everyone recognizes you, then it'd be harder to compare us directly if we no longer look alike or have that shared similarity. It was wrong and selfish decision, but it made me feel better. It wasn't wrong and it wasn't selfish. Okay, it is a completely fair strategy to have, especially when you are trying to grow a brand and an identity. And that's why it was a constant topic with Nano. Red pushed for this harder than I ever did because he knew how it affected me for years. Even if he didn't know how it affected even if he didn't know how it affected Cinder, right? It's not like it matters because it is just a fair business strategy to have. But no matter what the outcome was, I wasn't going to walk away from working with Nano. Silver was completely undeserving of this treatment, and it was my own insecurities that led me to making this choice. I became unapologetically evil towards her due to no direct action of her own. There's no excuse for any of this. Unapologetically evil? Do these people not understand what evil means? This person is just like flatulating themselves for no reason. They are being way too hard on themselves for no reason. I understand the resentment. I understand like the level of resentment that you could get from being compared to somebody over and over again. And we've probably witnessed this too with a lot of musicians and a lot of like idols in real life, just to compare. But you don't have to go so hard at yourself for that. You don't have to like go this hard at yourself for that. If she feels like she has to apologize to Nano, that's fine. But I hope she understands. I hope Cinder understands that there was not any actual manipulation here and that there wasn't any like foul play or any malicious behavior. Moving on from Silvervale, let me talk about Spite. Once again, I had no involvement or knowledge of Red bringing up Spite to Nano in 2023. My only personal involvement with excluding someone specific from working with Nano was Silver. My design sheet and outfit were finished and made public at the very start of 2021. The first thing she mentions in a debut teaser in 2022 that was apparently posted on the same day as her original debut, which I honestly don't know if at the time this was intentional or not. I don't know when I first discovered Spite, and it could have been after she debuted. Is the rest of this even relevant? Is she just comparing stuff like that? Okay. This is irrelevant. We're just gonna skip to this. To Nano, I'm so sorry I let things get to this point or even entertain the thought of you working exclusively with me. No, you really shouldn't apologize to entertaining the idea of exclusivity. Sometimes that is an expectation that people make when conducting business, but if you want to apologize for her feeling wronged, that's fine, right? But everything here, not necessary. That's not fair to you. I wouldn't be here without you. She wasn't forced or coerced to sign a contract. As a matter of fact, she kind of like just said no, and there was no continuous pressure from there. So what's the issue? She she wasn't like she wasn't pressured into this contract. She said no, and that was all there was to it. That's not fair to you. Why? Why? I mean, I understand like the small implications here, right, as to why it couldn't be fair to her. But beyond that, why should either of these people care? Nano should not have cared. I wouldn't be here without you, and I wouldn't have been able to do most of what I've already done without you. I felt overtly attached to our relationship over the past 4 years and loved your work so much that I wanted to make myself exclusive to your art and should have never sought those feelings to be reciprocated. Okay? I feel like these people are getting way too emotionally attached to a situation that, again, should not have any emotional ties because this is just business and it should be treated as such. There was no manipulation, no coercion. The most you could say is that Red was being a little bit shady and a little bit backhanded and was definitely talking shit or attempting to allude shit or throw shade. But slanderous? No. Could you criticize the guy for that? Yes. But he wasn't doing anything exceptionally malicious. But that's not how these VTuber community people are going to view it. Everything you've ever worked on for me was always so perfect, and I lost sight of how everyone else around me would have felt. I had no intentions of pressuring you into anything, but looking back on my cloud of judgment, I can see how my messages felt that way. You know what? This is fair. This is fair. When I talked about how my models helped you improve, I meant that as looking back on how far we've come together. We've been friends for so long and cheered each other on. We both started growing and getting more opportunities like plushies, figures, etc. You had been my exclusive artist for full life 2D models for the majority of my time as a VTuber. And of course, I would have been sad if you didn't want to continue that relationship. But in all our other private DMs, I was okay with you ultimately doing what was best for you. I saw you as someone I trusted and loved and wanted to make sure you were still taking care of yourself with all the projects you took on, mine or otherwise. I never saw you just as a business partner. I thought I was reassuring you that I'd always be understanding if you wanted to move on to other projects. I genuinely appreciate our friendship. I always saw you as a close friend, and I'm so sorry for what I put you through. Which, realistically, wasn't that much. This individual was not put through that much. It was just interpreted in a very naive way, which is unfortunate. But you know what? If she feels like this apology is necessary, and she feels genuinely hurt, if Nano feels genuinely hurt, and if Cinder really feels like she owes Nano an apology, I think this is a fair apology. I genuinely think that this is a fair apology. It's not a necessary apology, but it is fair. I think Cinder has actually handled this in the best way possible. But a lot of people probably won't, understand that. A lot of people won't understand that. Which is very unfortunate when it comes to situations like this, because somebody could be like heavily misrepresented or heavily smeared. Because the other document is going to lead to a lot of people taking like the wrong implications from this, which you could probably already witness. But like, it's just unfortunate how this could have been solved privately. And they could have apologized to each other, and none of this would have ever had to be made public and potentially like damage anybody's reputations. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to industries like this, when it comes to VTubing, when it comes to being a content creator, your reputation is incredibly important for your business. As for the rest of this, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think any of this is necessary. So we're just gonna end it at that. We're just gonna end it at that. So my conclusions is that if Cinder is being genuine and trying to apologize for her being slighted, you know what? Cinder is being a very amicable individual here and is doing a pretty good job. But at the same time, I don't think that Nanoless should have ever had to make these allegations or even make a document like this. It is very interpersonal. There was hardly any manipulation, if you could even call it that, unless you are incredibly naive and have a completely warped idea of what manipulation means. But regardless, kudos to Cinder for actually providing an apology to somebody that felt wrong. In a lot of situations, somebody's ego will get the best of them and not ever provide an apology. And I think that this apology is fair. If Nanoless really felt that way, you know what? It's her prerogative. And this could have been communicated better behind the scenes. It didn't have to be made public. But because it was made public, there are going to be a couple of people whose reputations are unfortunately now stained for the time being, which could lead into a couple of business hindrances. And now Cinder has to basically Cinder basically has to confirm that she has a boyfriend because of stuff that people were saying in regards to this. to try to come at her when they really shouldn't have, because the situation could have easily been handled, behind the scenes, right? And now that she had to confirm that, it's probably going to hurt her reputation even more, because when it comes to being a VTuber, especially a female VTuber, part of being a VTuber is pretending that you are this idol that doesn't have a boyfriend, right? It's maintaining this character that continues this parasocial relationship, or that continues parasociality, which feeds this business model. It's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate.